Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. Happy Monday. Welcome back. There's really only one thing to talk about this weekend, and that is Moses Itauma versus Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte very much this week had a very, he was very respectful, very calm, and he kept saying in interviews and on all the boxing media, all the platforms that he was calm, he was chilled, he was just doing his thing. There was nothing sort of combative or inflammatory that he said about Moses Itauma in the build-up or any press conferences or anything. It very much, to me, as the week went on, felt very much like Deontay Wilder, you know, in his sort of demeanour in his last few fights, where he was very calm. It was all about the love, and he came across as a lovely character. And as we all saw in Deontay Wilder's performances, the killer had very much left the building. And I think this was very much the case with Dillian Whyte. And this may have been the case since the Fury fight, really. And that kind of passed over into fight night. He came out well, but there was not a lot of killer in there, to be fair, was there? And it just had the sense to me as the week went on that Dillian Whyte was very much in the same place, very calm, very chilled, but very much the killer had left the building. I said in my prediction that this could be over in 3 rounds or less, and we didn't even get a round, and it was over. We talked very much in the build about Dillian Whyte, about his punch resistance being on the wane and pretty much gone, and I said a lot of this was very much due to, if you look at a lot of the times he's been stopped and a lot of shots he gets caught with, which was the uppercut, was very much the fact that Dillian Whyte had a habit of, when he was under pressure and taking shots, kind of leaning forward with his head down and not looking at his opponent. And this is what happened in the fight. If we look at what happened in the fight, I think it was a left hook on the top of Dillian's head, sort of to the top and the rear of Dillian's head. And that kind of had a delayed reaction type effect where he got hit. He didn't seem hurt at first, and a few seconds later, he seemed to look like his legs were gone. And that was really the punch that did the damage. And then the finishing shot for me that did the damage was a right hook, which he took kind of high to the jaw. A lot of people thought it was on a temple. If you look, it's high to the jaw. But the same, Dillian Whyte was leant forward. He didn't see the punch coming, got caught high on the jaw. And that was all she wrote after that. The obvious positives to take out of the fight in terms of Moses Itauma were, and I said this in the prediction as well, was it's all Moses Itauma's feet and his balance. The balance stems from the fact his feet are in the right position, and it very much leaves him able to kind of throw shots at will and when he wants to throw them. People talk a lot about his punch selection. For me, punch selection is very much down to when you're in the gym, you do drills on the pads and you're throwing these combinations. And the point of drilling these over and over is so they become instinctive and second nature, meaning you don't have to do a lot of thinking about the punches you throw because they're instinctive. When the openings were there, you're going to drill certain different combinations over and over so that whatever's unguarded, depending on where your opposition is, you can throw the punches that are called for, that are going to get through when your opponent's in those situations. But this means that while they're instinctive and you don't have to think about them that much, that's when you can flow. That's when you see fighters with this fluidity. Not just fluidity of movement, but fluidity to throw shots, to land in the places where your opponent is unguarded and is open to those shots. So punch selection for me is very much a natural process once it becomes instinctive because of the thousands of hours you spent drilling this stuff in the gym. It is very, very, very impressive. And in stark contrast, we talk about the feet and when we talk about Moses' feet, if you look at him, a lot of the time, there are times when he does overreach, but that's to be expected when you're throwing a long backhand. It's kind of natural that's going to happen. But if you look at him, the majority of the time, he doesn't use a sort of a massively wide stance. At times he does, but for the bulk, his stance is perfect and his feet are perfect in the sense that if you drew a line through the centre of his head from the side on, that line would fall pretty much somewhere in between the middle of his stance, and that's where you want it to be, and this provides ultimately fantastic balance, and then your movement can come off that. If your feet are correct all the time, then it leads to fluidity of motion and movement and the way he moves around and all them kind of things we talked about in the build-up. It's important to keep in context what he beat on Saturday night. He beat Dillian Whyte, the name, but there wasn't a massive amount of Dillian Whyte, the fighter, left. He had lost it. He said himself that he'd spent a lot of time, sort of 3 months or so, on almost shedding weight. And for someone who's been in the was it the lightest ever, maybe? But at this stage of his career, when you shed that much weight, it's gonna not be beneficial to your punch resistance. And in a fighter where the punch resistance is already on the wane, largely. So it was always a trade-off between he's going to come in shape, but there are going to be diminishing returns. That I think one of them was going to add to the punch resistance, albeit, like I said, the one that really done the damage was high on the top of the head, landed blind, and from that point on, it was really game over. I do think that especially around your talk sports and the boxing media outlets, we should hold the fuck on a bit with he is the greatest thing to ever walk the planet, and silly things, talking about Usyk next, which most people with a sound mind are not going to be calling for that. We haven't seen Moses Itauma deal with defiance in front of him yet, and by that I mean when he hits them, they go, and that's testament to how good he is and how hard he hits. But we do need to see that, and I think there are two outstanding chins in the heavyweight division at the moment. One of them is Filip Hrgović, and one of them is Alexander Usyk. And we don't really talk about Alexander Usyk, how great he is at taking the shot and how great his chin is. But for me, make no mistake, Alexander Usyk's got a fantastic chin at heavyweight, up there with the best from at heavyweight. And I think the best is probably Filip Hrgović. And we saw more examples of that on Saturday night because Adelaide hit him with some massive hooks at times and didn't really pose Hrgović that much of distress or a problem. But in terms of next, I would love to see Hrgović, because I think that's a guy that, with his arrogance, with his great chin, he's a hard fucking man. And if Moses Itauma dispatched Hrgović early, then stop the fucking press. We are onto something here. But I don't think Hrgović beats him. Hrgović, I've never rated Hrgović greatly as some others have, but some of his attributes are his punch resistance and how fucking tough he is. So Hrgović would be great next, though I don't see it. Hrgović took a bad cut, and it's going to be a while before he goes out again. I think they're going to want Moses Itauma out a lot quicker than that. The other guy they're talking about is Jermaine Franklin, which I think is perfect. He's a semi-name in America. He's technically good, underrated, and has got a great chin. So that'd be another great fight next, and then maybe Hrgović next after that. But we do have to just temper, the how we're looking at Moses Itauma. We do have to temper that somewhat and say, Itauma looks great. He's got all the ability. One of the things that, going back to the shot selection, which yes, it's great. But that becomes from the fact that he has, people talk about him being 20 years old, which he is, but he's been boxing since he was 9. That means he's been boxing for 10 years. So we shouldn't read too much into the age, really. Yeah, it's great that he's doing this at 20 years old, but he's been boxing 10 years. And he's got two distinct advantages over most fighters out there, or a lot of fighters out there. Going back to the punch selection thing. Now, this means that he's drilled thousands of times, but it does say to me that he is exceptionally trainable. He's exceptionally trainable. To keep his stance and his footwork so good, to keep his balance so good. These are all technical things, and a lot of fighters found. Just look at Dillian Whyte. Just look at the times at how far his feet and his weight, or his chin and his weight, is over the front foot. Way too far. And it's so far that he ends up leaning forward and looking at the floor and getting caught by punches he doesn't see. The fact that Moses Itauma has such good footwork, his body position and his weight is so impeccable for the majority of the time, suggests to me that he's amazingly trainable. And that is a massive advantage over a lot of fighters out there. He's listened and he's looked and he's been taught and he's drilled things and they've sunk in. He's sunk them in and employed them. This is massive. And you align that with his obvious natural ability, That is where Moses Itauma is exceptional for me. The fact that he's amazingly trainable and that he can transfer these things from the gym and imprint them and then relay them into the ring almost perfectly at times, and the fact that he also has an abundance of naturally gifted talent. Those two things together combined are all the ingredients you need. Yes, along with a fighter's heart, a fighter's mentality, which I don't doubt that he's got. You know, for if you listen to the stories of in the gym, you know that he's had wars with some really high-level guys. You don't doubt it. We do need to see it, and we do need Moses Itauma. We need to see him deal with defiance. We need to see him with a guy in front of him that takes Moses' best shots and is still there. And then we see what's in the background. Then we see what else he's got in the bag, in the tool bag. It all looks exceptional. You know, there's nothing else to say than that. But we must temper this by saying that fight was one of his easiest. It doesn't even class as being called a fight. It wasn't a fight. Dillian Whyte, and I said in my prediction, Dillian Whyte is a great. I like Dillian Whyte. I'm a big fan of Dillian Whyte, and man, regardless of the PED stuff. So this is not getting on Dillian Whyte at all, and I give him all the respect in the world. A, for taking that, whether he took it for the money or as a cash out or what, you know what I mean? And maybe that's what he did. You know, maybe he did take it as a cash out. Maybe Dillian probably knew he didn't have a chance, you know, to be fair, in the back of his head. And that's not going to help. You walk to the ring knowing that it's very unlikely you're going to beat this guy. At this stage of your career, with a limited tool set that Dillian's got, you probably know you're not going to win. And if you've got an element of doubt upstairs, kind of game over. Other stuff we can say. I wrote some notes because I didn't want to miss anything out. One of the other things that I sort of made note of was the fact that when Dillian was near the end and the finish was there, you see so many fighters rush in and they miss shots, they overextend, their balance goes out the window in the eagerness to dispatch who's in front of them. That never happened. Everything was pretty calm. Again, he kept his shape, he kept his body position. And again, as I said earlier, this allows him to throw the shots at will that he wants, the shots that are indelled on him, the shots that come instinctively. There are so many superlatives you can throw at him, with the caveat of we have got to see him in a guy in front of him who isn't going to fall over, who isn't going to roll over, and who is arrogant enough to believe that they're not beaten before they get to the ring. And Hrgović is that. Hrgović is that for me. Jermaine Franklin has been defiant. He gave AJ a good fight. He gave Dillian Whyte a fight, and I only saw that fight once, but I remember thinking, I thought Whyte lost. So, you know, great opponent, but I'd love to see Hrgović. I would love to see Hrgović in there. Because I'd like to see a guy who's arrogant in front of Moses Itauma. People said about Moses that he's got an arrogance, and I've said this before. I remember myself, Joe, and Bob from Canada's Boxing Channel have a conversation, and I said I like a bit of arrogance in my fighters. I like fighters who've got a bit of arrogance. Not dislikable arrogance, but a little bit of arrogance that a fighter needs. A fighter at the top level needs that. Whether they display it or not, you have to have a little bit of arrogance. You're in a fucking boxing gym, and you're in there with other killers. You need a bit of arrogance. You need to be a killer. And Moses is that. I don't find him arrogant at all. I love the demeanour. I love the persona. There was a thing he said in an interview afterwards. I think he said that Michael Buffer had said to him, Wembley next, and Moses said, I'm not bothered where it is, brother. I just need to box. I just need to box. I'm not bothered where. I'm not bothered about being a star. I just need to box. Boxing's in my life and I need it. And I think Ade said this on the video that he said, what a perfect response that is. That's exactly the response you would need. What else can you say? I was speaking to a mate of mine, Lee Hunter, who's a really good amateur. I was speaking to him yesterday, and he was talking about the movement, the shot selection, and just how accomplished he looks. And he really does. He really does. I feel sorry for Dillian. I really wouldn't want to see Dillian fight again. There's talk of Joe Joyce, and he's the same. I don't want to see Joe Joyce or Dillian fight again. Don't want to see either of them fight again, if I'm honest. It's a shame to see Dillian go out like that, but he's walked out with a big fucking bag. So, you know, you pay your money, you take your choice. So let's not feel too sorry for Dillian, but I like Dillian. Unashamedly, I like Dillian. He's a character. I like him. And he's become more likeable in the way that Deontay Wilder became more likeable. But with you become more likable and less of a killer, that ain't going to work in a boxing ring. And this is what happened to Deontay Wilder, and this is what seemingly happened to Dillian Whyte. And I think it happened to Dillian Whyte possibly a long time ago. So yeah, in short, Moses Itauma looks fantastic, but let's just chill out a little bit, you know? Let's wait till he proves it. He's doing all that he's asked of him so far. We can't ask anything more of Moses. It's not his fault that he's dispatching these guys easily. It's kind of though, the problem is now he's fought Dillian Whyte, he can't really go backwards in levels, and we can talk about Dillian Whyte's level, but I heard discussion saying that Dillian Whyte wasn't world level. I think Dillian Whyte's world level. I don't think necessarily you always have to beat all the top guys at world level to be world level. Let's not remember, he's beaten Joseph Parker. You know, and Joseph Parker is very highly regarded. So I think Dillian is world level, but the problem with that is now it's very hard to go very far back from Dillian Whyte in terms of opponents next. So Hrgovic will be perfect because it's another level up from Dillian Whyte. Jermaine Franklin, I think, is perfect next, you know. But the problem for Moses and his team is that they've not learned anything about Moses for a very long time because we've just seen the same display, making light work of people. I mean, you could argue that Mike Balogun was a tougher fight than Dillian Whyte. Well, it was. Couldn't even argue. It's fact. So we do need to see more, and it's not his fault we're not seeing more at the moment. But the fact that he's coming along and getting rid of guys and decent level guys early could become a bit of a problem because there may be a jump from guys that he's going to deal with early right into guys that are going to give him problems. And going back to Usyk and Hrgovic, I think having two fantastic heavyweight chins is Hrgovic is going to give you defiance. He's got a chin. But Hrgovic has nowhere near the ability or the skills to beat Moses Itauma. Nowhere near. The difference between Hrgovic and Usyk is Usyk has the defiance. Usyk has a great chin, but that man has the skills. That man has the skills, the ability, the will, everything needed to beat Moses Itauma. Whether he would, we don't know. We don't know. But just on an objective level, by knowing what we've seen from Alexander Usyk, you could put, don't get me wrong, you could put Usyk in with Itauma now, and Itauma may win. I know you're going to freak out at that, but that's the possibility. That is the possibility. We still have the ever-aging Usyk, and a lot of people thought he'd lost a yard against Dubois the first time. Not me, I thought he looked great. But I would steer Itauma away from Usyk yet, 100%. But that's not to say if he did throw him in, there's a complete wild card against that he wouldn't beat him. He may well beat him. Bigger upsets have happened, haven't they? Saying that I wouldn't. I'd keep him well clear. I'd give him 2 or 3 more fights, 2 or 3 more good hard fights, so he can get rounds in, he can get real work, he can get hit back, and he can hit people that aren't going to fall over, i.e. Hrgovic, Franklin maybe. So that's all I've got to say. I'll see you all soon.